This movie is praised as being born for the big screen. It won 6 Oscars that year. The worldview of the original novel even surpasses that of The Lord of the Rings. This is the most suitable movie to watch in the cinema in the past decade. The second part of Dune has been released today. The North American IMDb score has reached 9.0, which is the same as The Shawshank Redemption. The plots of the two movies are closely related. For those who want to go to the cinema to watch the second part, today Chi-Chi will take you to review the first part. The story takes place 10,000 years later, when humans leave Earth and start interstellar colonization. In order to seize the most important energy source in the universe, spices, the major families within the interstellar empire are undercurrents. This substance can enhance the ability to perceive time and space. Without it, interstellar navigation will be difficult. In the entire galactic empire, Arrakis is the only place where spices are produced, but it is a desert planet with a harsh climate and extremely dry. At the same time, the freemen who were born and raised on Arrakis. They are also extremely dangerous. Born and raised in the desert, they can not only adapt to the harsh local environment, but also coexist with giant sandworms. This indestructible monster, which is hundreds of meters long, lives under the sand dunes, just like a whale swimming in the sea, which makes the mining of spices extremely difficult. As one of the most powerful families at the time, the Atreides family was also involved in this dispute. The protagonist of the story, Paul, is the only son of the Atreides family. This morning, Paul woke up from his sleep and was told by his mother that he needed to dress up and attend a ceremony during breakfast. Paul was thirsty and wanted to drink water, but his mother asked him to use a power called sound control. Paul's first attempt was unsuccessful, and the air around him seemed to freeze. Paul was concentrating. It turns out that sound control is a skill of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Paul's mother Jessica is a member of the sisterhood, but it doesn't seem to be an easy skill to learn. Then a huge spaceship landed and a herald led by a group of strangely dressed people came down and issued the Emperor's decree. It was announced that the Atreides had gained jurisdiction over the planet Arrakis. Paul's father, Duke Leto, walked up to the herald and formally accepted the Emperor's decree. The scene changed and Paul's martial arts teacher Duncan walked down from the spaceship. He was about to go to Arrakis as a member of the advance team. Paul wanted to go with him, but Duncan refused. Paul mentioned that he had been dreaming about Arrakis and the freemen and Duncan who lived with the freemen. He dreamed that Duncan died in the war, so he was worried about him. Duncan told him not to worry. Paul asked his father again to go to Arrakis with Duncan, but his father told him that the risk of this trip to Arrakis was not the freemen and the desert, but the political danger. The Atreides were becoming more and more popular, which had threatened the Emperor, so the Emperor took the jurisdiction of Arrakis away from the previous Harkonnen family. The purpose is to provoke a war between the two families. Duke Leto wants to take this opportunity to form an alliance with the freemen to explore the true wealth of the planet Arrakis, and he also hopes that Paul can become a qualified heir. On the eve of departure, the Bene Gesserit sisterhood came to visit. Paul's mother Jessica was kneeling and waiting for the arrival of the sisterhood's virgin. The spaceship landed in a huge storm. Paul was awakened by his mother to go for a test. His mother Jessica and private doctor Mr. Yu were waiting for him. The blurred figures of the two and the transparent door behind them showed that an unknown test was waiting for Paul. After entering the room, the virgin asked Paul to put his hand into a small box, took out a poisonous needle and pointed it at Paul's neck, requiring Paul not to take his hand out no matter what happened, otherwise he would die. The test began, and the gradually increasing pain made Paul feel miserable. The mother outside the door seemed to be able to sense her son's pain and kept passing on strength to her son. After feeling the pain continuously, Paul saw a fantasy, and overcame his fear from the heart, and his eyes became sharp and firm. Paul passed the test successfully. After understanding Paul's dream, the Virgin Mary only left one sentence, "Goodbye young human, I hope you live." When the mother saw the Virgin Mary off, scolded again. The sisterhood's skills have always been passed down to girls, not boys, and Paul inherited a powerful power in his body, but it has not awakened at this time. The sisterhood has been looking for the chosen one for many years, and he is not sure whether Paul can be competent for the sisterhood's century-long plan. If Paul fails, they have other arrangements. This conversation was heard by Paul behind him. His mother told him that the sisterhood has been looking for a prophet for many years. He is powerful enough to connect the past and future of time and space, but Paul has since developed a gap with his mother and thinks that he is just a pawn in the sisterhood's great cause. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of departure. Paul would bid farewell to the beautiful and rich planet of Caladan and officially embark on the journey to Arrakis. The fleet landed and the sky was filled with yellow sand. The moment the hatch opened, the smell of a foreign land came to our faces. The sand was blown by the wind, and the Atreides family was like being baptized by the sun. Paul squinted his eyes, as if to tell us that this Dune world was extraordinary. The freemen who gathered like ants in the distance had humble and subtle eyes, and shouted a strange name loudly. Lee sang Aljub Freeman and Lee the Savior in the prophecy, they were on Paul. Seeing the shadow of the Savior, the ornithopter flew towards the wall in the shielding wall. The temperature here during the day was as high as 60 degrees Celsius, without water or rain, and the heat was unbearable. At the same time, Paul, who was alone in the room, keenly noticed the hunting target set by the enemy, and the operator was the Harkonnen spy who was sealed in the concrete wall 6 weeks ago. War is imminent. On the other side, Baron Harkonnen is conspiring with the Sisterhood to use the Emperor's Sardaukar Legion to launch an operation against the Atreides family, and promises to show mercy to Paul and his mother. At this moment, Duncan, who has successfully formed an alliance with the Freemen, returns and brings back a Freeman leader. The two sides reach a peace agreement that the Atreides family will not disturb the underground city where millions of Freemen live, and will protect their safety. The next day, Dr. Keynes, the planet's omniscient judge appointed by the Emperor, brought them a distillation suit made by the Freemen, which is a kind of suit that can be recycled. It also uses the water in the body and filters it into drinkable water. Then he led Duke Leto and his party to the spice mining site. But little did they know that a disaster was waiting for them when they arrived at the mining site. Soon, they found the largest creature on the Dune planet near the mining vehicle, the sandworm, which is also regarded as a totem by the Freemen. At this moment, the sandworm was attracted by the rhythm of the mining vehicle and was rushing towards them at a very fast speed. At the moment when the carrier was about to lift the mining vehicle for evacuation, one of the carrier's fixed points failed unexpectedly, making it impossible to complete the evacuation. The sandworms will arrive in 4 minutes, and the crisis is imminent. Duke Leto gave an order and drove the flapping wing aircraft to rescue. Just as Paul walked out of the cabin and stepped onto the spice-rich desert, the familiar touch made him hallucinate. He knelt in front of the mining vehicle and forgot the impending danger. The sandworms were getting closer and closer. At the critical moment, Cornella left. He was there at the last second before the sandworms arrived. They successfully took off, and the huge sandworms swallowed the mining vehicle. The scene was shocking. After returning home, Paul was still in a daze. Dr. Yu said that Paul had an allergic reaction to the spices, which was why this happened, but Paul didn't think it was a big deal. He told his mother that he had hallucinations, saw the Arrakis girl who had appeared in his dreams countless times, saw himself kissing her, was killed by her, saw an important dagger, and even saw his mother who was pregnant again. When Paul's mother heard this, she showed an incredible expression, because she herself just found out about the pregnancy. With mixed emotions, everyone welcomed the night, but they didn't know that it would be a sleepless night. As usual, Dr. Yu brought sleeping pills to Paul and his father, but the Duke didn't take them. He leaned on Paul's mother's legs and fell asleep. The next second, the Duke woke up after hearing the strange noise and walked out of the house cautiously. What caught his eye was the fallen servant. The Duke went up to take a closer look and found that the person was Paul's mother's maid. In the next second, the flying needle pierced the Duke's shield. At this moment, the Atreides Legion's shield completely failed, the alarm sounded, and everyone gathered urgently, but what greeted them was the Harkonnen family officially invaded and dropped bombs one after another, destroying the Paul family's base. Seeing their new home being ruthlessly bombed, the Atreides warriors were filled with anger. They declared war with swords in hand, ready to die. On the other side, the Emperor's Sardaukar Legion also arrived, and together with the Harkonnen army, they looted the headquarters and abducted Paul and his mother. At this moment, an unexpected thief appeared beside Paul's father, Paul's family doctor, Dr. Yu, because his wife was held hostage by Baron Harkonnen. He had no choice but to betray the Atreides family. He replaced Paul's father with a denture full of poison gas, which could instantly spread poison gas after being bitten. He wanted to take this opportunity to retaliate against the Baron and promised to take good care of Paul. At this moment, Paul and his mother were isolated on the enemy's plane. In order not to break their promise to the Sisterhood, they chose to throw Paul and his mother off the plane and let the sandworms kill them. But Paul's mother, who was extremely calm, made a gesture to Paul, and Paul began to use sound control. Move or gag, but it didn't work, just when Paul was about to be thrown out of the plane. Paul and his mother successfully escaped. Seeing everything destroyed before their eyes, they fell into deep despair. They hid in the tent prepared by Dr. Yu and opened the package he left behind. At the same time, Paul's father had fallen into the clutches of the hackman. Dr. Yu, who thought the deal was successful, naively believed the devil. Just as the Baron was unprepared to give a victory speech, Paul's father left his last words and gnashed his fangs. Duke Leto fell from the dead. On the other side, Paul found his father's sword. At this moment, the mother and son understood everything. The death of his father made Paul completely collapse. He fell into hallucinations again and saw himself becoming a freeman. In the name of his father and the name of the Atreides family, he fell into an endless war. He was afraid of his future self. His hands were covered in blood, and the flames of war spread to the universe. His mother tried her best to calm Paul down. However, after a long time, Paul finally calmed down and slowly put on his father's sword. This action also announced that he officially took on the mission of Duke Atreides. After Paul and his mother came out of the tent, they successfully met up with Duncan, who came to pick them up, and learned the Emperor's final choice. Paul had no choice but to seek refuge in an ecological experimental station with Dr. Keynes. This should have been a paradise, but the Emperor chose to defeat the major families one by one to defend his authority. Paul has realized at this moment that only unity can fight against the Empire, and the seeds of becoming king have quietly sprouted in Paul's heart. However, at this moment, the Emperor's Sudoka Legion has arrived, and Duncan went alone to meet the enemy but unfortunately died. Under the guidance of Dr. Keynes, Paul and his mother fled in a flapping wing aircraft, preparing to seek the protection of the freemen in the south, and at the same time betrayed the Emperor. When Dr. Keynes was attacked by the Sudoka army, he used a sand machine to attract sandworms and was buried in the desert with the enemy. In Harkonnen, the enemy planes chased Paul and they had no choice but to escape into the sandstorm with a speed of 800 kilometers per hour. Facing the fierce storm, Paul, who was in danger, flashed the future again in his mind. He saw an old freeman: "We must move with the flow of the process, we must join it, we must flow with it." At this moment, Paul chose to let go of the joystick and let the plane follow the storm. After an unknown amount of time, they gradually climbed to an altitude of 5,000 meters and rushed out of the storm in one go, but the ornithopter was destroyed. The camera turned, and although Baron Harkonnen did not die in the previous poison gas, he was also seriously injured. After losing his troops and generals, he began to plan the sale of spices and officially launched a plan to wipe out the freemen. After landing, Paul and his mother climbed up a high rock, changed into distillation suits, and set off on a difficult journey on foot to find the freeman tribe. During this time, Paul appeared countless times. The hallucination saw a strange freeman and the girl who appeared countless times in the dream. After walking for a day and a night, Paul and his mother accidentally stepped into an ancient sand. Sure enough, the unique rhythm attracted sandworms, and they ran hard towards the rock. At the moment when Paul climbed up the rock, the sandworm finally revealed its full appearance in the film. A huge mouth full of fangs stared at Paul with a unique rhythmic panting sound, but he did not launch further attacks on Paul. The surroundings were as silent as death, and suddenly a rhythmic knocking sound rang out. The sandworm was successfully attracted. Paul took the opportunity to escape, but before they could catch their breath, several freemen appeared. The leader was the freeman leader brought by Duncan. The leader thought Paul was a promising talent, but he was hostile to Paul's mother and planned to test his mother's skills. "What didn't you say you were a weirding woman and a fighter?" The sisterhood's abilities were truly extraordinary. After the leader was defeated, he planned to take Paul and his mother back to the dungeon and then decide what to do with them. At this moment, a fateful scene occurred. Paul was surprised to find the girl he had seen in his dreams countless times in the team. God led them together and their fate began to entangle. Just as they were about to leave, another freeman in the team, Jamie, came out. Because the leader was defeated before, he wanted to challenge Paul's mother, but the freeman religious class did not allow challenging priestesses. Paul immediately stood up and fought for his mother, and the sun rose. Before the duel began, the girl Chinny handed Paul the gold tooth pen that her great-aunt had given her. It was made of sandworm teeth, just like the dagger that had appeared in Paul's hallucination before. They all thought that Paul would die in this duel, and Jamie's shouting came to their ears, and the duel began. Paul, who had been trained by the sisterhood since childhood, easily put the dagger on Jaime's neck, trying to force him to admit defeat. However, he didn't know that there was no room for surrender in a duel, it was either you or I. At this moment, the power of the Savior in Paul, who had never killed anyone, gradually awakened, and he decisively stabbed Jaime's heart. Jaime fell down. Chani looked at Paul with complicated eyes. Paul also won the respect of everyone with this victory. The leader was ready to take Paul and his mother back to the dungeon, but his mother wanted to return to Caledon, but Paul refused. He knew that his father came here not for spices and wealth, but for the power of the freemen. Fate led him to the desert, and he decided to return to the dungeon with them. On the way back to the city, Paul saw the freemen warriors driving sandworms in the desert. This is the power of the desert, and the story of the first Dune ends here. But everything has just begun. This is a film that perfectly combines business and art. The first part, which is 2.5 hours long, may make some viewers feel that the pace is a bit slow, but this is undoubtedly an epic blockbuster that has become a benchmark for science fiction. It is worth experiencing the shocking audiovisual language in the cinema. The second part of the Dune world has been released. Interested friends can go and experience it in person, and perhaps they will have a new understanding of science fiction films. See you next time.